Hey everyone, it's Simon Mainwaring, CEO and founder of Hurst, and good morning. Thank you for some time on a Thursday. This is the next webinar in our series, which is really designed to help you unlock the full value of purpose in your business and allow you to scale your business so you can increase your impact in the world. And before I dive into our special guest today and what we're talking about, just a reminder, this time is for you. This is our chance to share some thinking based on the work we do, but also to answer your questions. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a toolbar, and in that you'll see Q&A. And if you just click on that, you'll be able to put questions into a dialogue box with us so that we can make sure that when we leave time at the end, we can answer questions specific to your business. So please make sure that we offer the greatest value to you for this time that you're investing with us, and click on the Q&A button, put your questions in there, and then we'll make sure we get to them at the end. So diving into today, we're talking about how companies are leveraging purpose to thrive in a constantly changing marketplace. How companies are leveraging purpose to thrive in a constantly changing marketplace. And I'm very excited because we've got a special guest, Hurst from Imperative, who is a longtime friend and colleague, someone I've admired for a long time. He wrote, this wonderful book called The Purpose Economy, and has been a real thought leader and practitioner out there in and around how you bring purpose to life on an individual and collective level inside companies. So Aaron, thank you for joining us.
It's so fun to be with you.
Right. Aaron and I usually circle each other at conferences over the coffee stations or, in the dim lights of the stage or whatever it might be. And it's so good to finally get some one-on-one time and share some thinking with everyone. So you see my contacts and Aaron's contacts there if you have any follow-up questions or anything. But again, the focus today is how companies are leveraging purpose to thrive in a constantly changing market. And again, please do enter your questions in the Q&A box. So let's dive in. I mean, the first thing, for those who are joining us for the first time, Aaron explained a little bit about Imperative. And we're a creative consultancy here in Los Angeles, California, and we drive growth for purpose-driven brands. And the way we do that is very simply, we help them on the strategy side to work out what they say and how to say it, really unlock their authentic purpose at an organizational level. We help them build culture around that with training and tools so that what they're saying out there in the marketplace is true inside the company. And then we do the creative work, the advertising work that brings that to life. So that's who we are. And Aaron, before we dive into something that I might share, why don't you just do a little bit of a top line on Imperative and what you're focused on?
No, absolutely. So Imperative is a technology company. So we often do the work after, Simon does his incredible work with his team around, the purpose of an organization. We're about activating that using our technology that helps individuals understand their purpose and then be able to work with their peers to truly change their approach to work, to own that purpose, to bring that to life in light of the organization. So we work with companies to basically go from, we know what our purpose is, to how do we actually have every employee own it using technology.
And I think, we all need technology to scale. I think one of the great challenges we all face is how do you leverage the intimacy of purpose between individuals and company-wide at scale? And that's where technology is so powerful. And you might say, well, why are we talking about purpose? Why is it so important now? I think, 5 years ago, it might have been a new conversation or something that was only emerging, but it does seem to be like every brand out there is talking about their purpose these days. And let me top line as to why this is important. 3 things are happening. Firstly, the challenges we face, as human beings on a planet are becoming more acute, and people are becoming more aware of them every day. Climate change, plastics in the ocean, loss of biodiversity. All of those issues are driving greater scrutiny on business as to the role they're playing in the world. Are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? At the same time, we've got younger demographics coming through, millennials and Gen Z, who look at the world differently than my generation, who kind of made a mess of things. And they look at the world through the lens of their values, and they want to support and buy and work for companies that are doing good. And then thirdly, social technologies are connecting people in ways that weren't imaginable before. We've got the web, social media, and smartphones, but now there's AI and AR and VR and all of these ways to connect so that we're absolutely not only aware, we're connected, and we're more values-driven than ever. So as you can imagine, the nature of your company, what its purpose is, how you show up in the world, the type of products you make, how you market, the give back you do to communities, all of that is now real business drivers as opposed to a nice to do or an afterthought once you've made some money. So that's a little bit of broader context. But I just want to, before we dive into what is really exciting, some exciting new research from Imperative, give a little bit of color to what purposeful cultures look like, purposeful leadership looks like inside organizations, just so that it might trigger some thoughts in your mind as to what more you could be doing inside your organization. So I'll quickly kind of glide through these, and then we'll dive into some of the Imperative's latest research. So obviously purpose starts with leadership. You know, it's not something that your HR department drives through volunteering or donations. It's not something that, you know, your employees do on the weekend. It's something that really the leadership of any organization must embrace, because it needs to be a permission slip for others inside the organization to do the same. Because if the leadership isn't demonstrating that that's equally important as making money or whatever else it might be, or hitting the numbers or quarterly reports or whatever, then unconsciously they always default to what they've always done, and they shy away from this sort of work. So if you want to drive growth for your organization by leveraging purpose, it starts at the top. You've got to demonstrate visibly to your teams that this is important. Secondly, you've got to nurture internal communications. You've got to have signage around your office. You've got to reward employees that are doing good. Here we see signage in a Cliff Bar, the new building, and also the daycare center they have up there in San Francisco. These are all ways that you really foster a family atmosphere inside an organization and really create a dialogue around the well-being of your team members, and also the well-being of society through the work that your company does. Thirdly, create rituals and traditions. You know, you've got Timberland's Path to Service on the right there. You know, they've got upwards of 90% of employees that volunteer each year. It's been going on for decades, and it really is a tentpole of the organization. And on the left there, you'll see Ben & Jerry's, rallying their employees around an issue they care very much about in terms of pride and LGBT and so on. So it's not just about lip service or talking about an idea in the abstract. It's about getting bums off seats and getting mobilized around it, and to do it through the lens of traditions. It might be an annual Path to Service with Timberland. It might be a quarterly ritual. For example, here at WeFirst, every quarter, the employees all vote for where we want to go and volunteer. So we were most recently at a pet shelter up here in West Los Angeles, and before that, we're at a homeless shelter. We got to pack some food for folks. So, let employees have an input as to what those rituals will look like. Thirdly, activate moments of culture. And that can be on an ongoing basis, like you see here with Zappos. On the left there, you see, the workstations at Zappos. And it looks like everybody's customized it in their own way. And that's great. It means they can bring their whole and authentic selves to work. And it creates a culture where everyone is seen as human beings, and they can show up in terms of who they are and what they care about. Meanwhile, Airbnb do these incredible events where they double down on what they stand for around the idea of universal belonging, and they bring in speakers and entertainers, and also have people from inside the organization get up and talk about what the company means to them. And that fosters that culture, that keeps that idea of purpose, that balloon in the air. So it's not something you say once at an annual shareholder meeting or whatever, and then over the year it disappears. And celebrate those employees that do this well. You've got to establish the same idea of a reward and recognition system for purpose as you do for driving business growth. So here you see Jorge at Whole Foods being recognized. And on the left there, you'll see Unilever's recruiting materials, which all say, meet our new head of sustainability. But the interesting thing about their materials are every single different person is on the cover of those materials, and they all play different roles inside the company, but they're all characterized as the head of sustainability. Why? Because they want everyone to think that they are leading their sustainability efforts, every employee. And so whether it's celebrating them for the work they've done or really putting them on a pedestal in terms of driving the purpose of the company forward, you've got to celebrate your employees. And then, when you mobilize them, look at cultural moments out there that you can leverage as well. It's not just the annual traditions or rituals you do yourself, but what if there's a big march going on? What if there's a big issue like the Women's March that came up? With the Women's March, everyone at WeFirst, we went down and we marched, and we stood up for what we believed in. And you see this here on, with Pride Day, with the Apple folks coming out. And you see Airbnb coming out as well in support of what they believe in. So look at those cultural moments, which you can't predict, that just come up, but that's when you've got to show up. And importantly, it's not about sort of associating with an issue that's either unrelated to your brand or something that you're really not, connected to, but rather it's really about showing up in things that in relationship to events that make sense with your company and what you stand for. And so if I was to give just some takeaways of that sort of broader activation color, I would say that purpose is a way of being that defines all aspects of your business, from your suppliers and supply chain to HR and the culture you build, through to the products you make and the innovations you do in and around products, through to how you market and who you market with, through to the community impact that you do. Secondly, purpose is how you live your legacy every day. For all of us as individuals and for all of us as companies, it's not about making money first and then hoping that we've got enough left over to do some good at the end. On an individual level, your life will be so much richer and fuller if you actually live it on a daily basis. It'll inform your feeling about going to work and what you do. And also, as sad as it sounds, when you look at the timelines that are being discussed in and around climate change and loss of biodiversity and all these other issues that are impacting our daily lives, we need to live it now. We can't wait 10 or 20 years to be making a meaningful difference. We need all our efforts to work together as soon as possible. Thirdly, purpose drives productivity and fulfillment. It drives productivity and fulfillment. When you feel better about where you work, you're more productive, you have a better time, you don't spend half your time at night wondering what the hell you're doing, and it's more fulfilling, both in the short and long term. And then when you do that, employees become effective advocates for your brand. Too many companies forget that their first line of marketing is their employees, and they invest in those employees every day. So why not equip them to speak meaningfully about what they're doing? Either because they'll attract other employees and really be kind of pre-qualify who you speak to, or because they'll let the world at large know that this is what you stand for, and they'll encourage people to like your brand and buy your product. So that's just a bit of a broad setup. And as I said at the top, hopefully that inspires some thinking. And you've got the Q&A box down the bottom. Just click on the Q&A. You can enter questions into the dialogue box so we can address them at the end. But now I'd love to shift over to Imperative. I mean, Aaron, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the work you've been doing in the last few years and the value it's been offering to companies. And then I'm really excited for you to share this latest research that's probably only a week or 10 days old. Thank you so much for sharing this with us first. And let's hear about Imperative.
Thank you. And I loved your examples. I think they just really bring it to life. And just in every one of those faces and every one of those scenes, you can sort of see exactly what you're talking about. I love how you bring that to life, Simon. It's really, really powerful. So who is Imperative? I'm going to answer as I go through the research. So it's sort of more of a blended answer. But, high level, my previous organization I started was called the Taproot Foundation. And we really changed the nature of corporate volunteering to say it's not just about donating your time, but actually your expertise is what nonprofits in the community need most. How can we get marketing, tech, HR, finance, other professionals to sort of mirror what the legal profession has done and make pro bono work part of their work? And had the honor of really building out U.S. marketplace of about $15 billion a year, working with the White House and leading companies, and then scaled that through affiliates around the world from China to Costa Rica. And what I found was that it was incredibly transformational for people to do pro bono work, but that they then went back to their day jobs where they were reporting being unfulfilled. And what really struck me was the opportunity not to just make volunteering better, but how do we change work itself so that what we're doing every day is nourishing and that we don't need supplements. We don't need these things on the side to get us to be fulfilled, that actually it's fully integrated into how we approach our work every day. And we've been on about a 5-year journey now to figure out through research and R&D how to do that, and are now really launching a platform, technology platform that is behind that. So that's sort of who we are in a nutshell, as it's stated here. Let me move this, real quickly here. As it's stated here, Imperative is a web-based career and culture transformation platform used by purpose-driven employers. So, Simon, that would have sounded much better in your voice, but that's...
You know what? I'm American. I did these dialect tapes to sound Australian. It's completely affected. I just, people think you're smarter when you got a foreign accent. I don't know. It's a complete lie. No, not true. Not true. Actually, after 20 years of being here in LA or in the States, I'm amazed that it hasn't changed. But so let's talk a little bit about, what's changing and why that change is accelerating.
No, and you hit on this, I think, earlier at a high level. I just wanted to share a couple of specific examples. So what we're seeing is change in two really big areas as it relates to this. One is culture and the culture of organizations, and you really hit on that. And then it's careers themselves. I think it's really important to think about what is the journey of the individual, because at the end of the day, the hero in both of our stories and the purpose story isn't the company, it's every single employee as a hero and setting them up to be that hero. So I just want to walk through just high level some of those macro changes going on. I was recently reading this book that's brilliantly captures sort of the change going on in the world visually. In the intro to it, it has this sort of summary, which I was trying to think about how to articulate it, and they just did it, Simon, in such a powerful way that I couldn't help but just steal it outright. Right. The world is changing faster than ever before, with billions of people hyper-connected to each other in an unprecedented global network. It allows for an almost instantaneous and frictionless spread of new ideas and innovations. Pretty good so far, right, Simon? That's
great.
Worded. Combine this connectedness with rapidly changing demographics, shifting values and attitudes, growing political uncertainty, and exponential advances in technology. And it's clear that the next decade is going to be set up for historic transformation. And they share so many examples of like why that is. But one of them is that we're really looking at exponential change. We've, in our lifetime, Simon, looked at more linear change. And often we sort of think, oh, this is linear change that's going on because it looks early on exponential change like it's linear. But what we're about to experience is unlike anything we've experienced before. Things are start to get super crazy. We think they're crazy now. Things are going to be like just changing. Things that took 10 years will take 10 minutes. I mean, it's just remarkable how fast it's accelerating.
It's because the half-life of technology is getting shorter and shorter, and then it's scaling that much more quickly. So you can imagine in your mind's eye that the change just bends upwards. My direct experience of linear change is how, the body is just heading vertically south. But, that's all I can say. That's my experience of linear change. But, yes.
No, I think that's right. I think this is the other thing is what's going on around the world, right? So in this book, they share in 2010 what the top 20 cities are. And then by 90 years from now, roughly, or 80 years from now, it's going to be a totally different world. And this is just
disappeared. LA's disappeared. San Francisco.
I know, it's all gone. So we sort of think these are the capitals of the world, and we're all like, ooh, Silicon Valley. In 90 years, Silicon Valley is not going to be super relevant. It's going to be all about Southeast Asia, India, and Africa. And even China, you can see, starts to lose its dominant position. But we're just going through radical change.
Wow.
And then on the talent side, we're seeing studies. Korn Ferry did a study that came out last year, and they said that in 10 years, we're going to see an $8.5 trillion talent shortage in terms of the impact on the economy that just we're not able to fill jobs. I talked to CEO after CEO, and they're just number one barrier to growth is they can't find the talent they need. And this is what's causing them to sort of have to dial down their aspirations. They have great strategies. They've got resources in other ways, but they don't fundamentally have the people. And this is just getting harder and harder. And part of the reason for this on the next slide is that studies are showing, and you see this already today, but a study by Dell and the Institute for the Future said 85% of the jobs in 2030 haven't been invented yet. So think about that. Of all the jobs that will exist in 2030, when my kids are going to be in their late 20s and 30s, they don't exist today. So it's like you go to school now to study what? Like, I'm going to go to professional school to study something that's going to be obsolete a year later. The idea of a career saying, I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer, I'm a lawyer, this is going to be really dated very quickly because these things are being replaced with AI. Basically, anything you can teach de facto means it's something that AI can do.
Right.
And the thing that's going to differentiate us is going to be what makes us human. So what is staying constant? It's that our humanity, right? Being a professional is going to become obsolete. Being a human is what's going to be the differentiator. And purpose really is what enables us to maintain sort of a constant sense of who we are, who our organizations are, what we're about through all this change. Because without that sense of direction, with everything else swirling around us, It's really hard to navigate. Purpose is necessary to be able to navigate this like insane change that's going on right now. It's the only chance for careers and cultures is to use that as an anchor, right? I mean, what's your take on that?
And I'll add one other bit of color to that. I just spent the last 3 days in Denver up at Aspen, at the Aspen Institute at an event called Hurst Call. And it was all about the climate crisis, not climate change, climate crisis. That's what I came away very, very clear in my mind is up till this point in time, we've had the luxury of changing our organizations and how we treat our people at the pace that we wanted to. How progressive are we? Are we following the leaders? Are we at the bleeding edge or whatever? But the timelines of these issues like climate crisis and so on are such now, they're accelerating towards us. So that exponential curve that you talk about, it's almost like something's coming back towards it from the future and forcing that wave up. So that in 5 years' time, if you're not incredibly clear about what you stand for as a company, and on the strength of that, have the ability to attract employees that are in alignment with that, you're just not going to be relevant to the marketplace. It sounds alarmist, it sounds scary, but you can imagine we're already seeing enough evidence of the impact of all of these challenges on our lives. If that increases at the rate it's going right now, you can imagine business will change its whole mindset. So I think in the face of technology, purpose is absolutely, our humanity is the constant. And in the context of the challenges we face, the humanity of your brand, of your culture will be even more important.
Absolutely. And just that agility, it's just so critical to have that agility. So we really were looking at in this research you mentioned earlier that we're just releasing, sort of how do you create that shift in people so that they truly are sort of operating out of purpose? And I wanted to share sort of what we discovered there. And I think the first thing, which is really critical, is to understand that individual purpose is not the same thing as organizational purpose. And that when we create cultures that are strong, it's about finding that intersection between individual and organizational purpose. A lot of companies go and create an organizational purpose or a definition around it, put it on big PowerPoint, CEO gives a speech. Individuals don't activate that until they can connect it to their own sense of what matters to them, their own values, their own purpose. And I'm sure, Simon, you've seen that in your work.
Yeah, completely. And, I think one of the biggest takeaways we have, we work with a lot of sort of HR departments and talk to CHROs, chief HR officers and so on. And they say that the big challenge for them is they now are the storytellers for a brand. Yeah. And the big challenge for them is to win the talent wars because, without generalizing, a lot of these younger folks don't want to work with large companies. They're more entrepreneurial by nature. And so, you've got to be a storyteller around the purpose of a brand to attract them to even come and work with you.
No, you got to create a sense of tribe. And I think the problem is once you get over that 150 people, it doesn't feel like a tribe. So it's like, how do you create storytelling, create ways to extend beyond that? So absolutely. So as we get into sort of what are the things that actually we found made a big difference, one is people being self-aware. I know what brings meaning to my work. People need to have that self-awareness. If people don't have that, they're very unlikely to be fulfilled, which makes sense, but very few companies are actually helping people have that self-awareness. It's about a mindset. If people don't see work as being about more than money or status, they're not going to understand purpose. They're not going to embrace it fully. So we have to fundamentally work a mindset, which is much more psychological. And the other one is culture. We found people who were fulfilled reported having regular conversations about their development and career with their peers. Right. Whereas people who didn't report that they were doing that were much less fulfilled. So that's sort of the activity as an ongoing basis that we're finding really matters. So just talking about self-awareness here for a second, and transition to the next slide here. Yeah. So if someone is self-aware about what brings them fulfillment, 63% chance of being fulfilled, and it's pretty bleak if they don't, 17%, right? So the number one thing that we recommend to companies is help your employees know what fulfills them. Because if they don't know what fulfills them, they're very unlikely to sort of make changes necessary to be fulfilled, but they're also not actively having gratitude for what they're already getting. They tend to see everything sort of as glass half empty instead of half full. Right. So this is absolutely vital. So if you're laying out an organizational purpose, the degree to which you have a fertile ground for that, to plant that, is based on whether or not people are aware of what fulfills them to begin with.
Right. Makes total sense. And it's hard to know that sometimes, which is why this work is so important that you do. Yeah.
No, absolutely. So one of the things we've done, which Simon, you and I have collaborated on some, is that we have a assessment on our platform that helps people define what brings purpose to them individually. And then each company can customize that to say, okay, it's wonderful, Simon, that you get purpose from X. This is why at Airbnb, that is so valuable to us. And here's how we want you to bring that every day to help advance the work that we do to make the world a better place, right? So it's not enough just to get people that self-awareness. They need to be able to have that linkage to the organizational purpose and to understand that. So being able to scale across, an organization of 20,000 people, that sort of moment of self-awareness, but then also starting to see the connectivity to the organization.
Right, totally makes sense.
So the next piece is purpose mindset, which to me is one of the most exciting opportunities. And something actually, Simon, I'd love to work with you more on. So, yeah. Have you seen much of the research around growth mindset?
A little bit, but I think, the way the mind works and the sort of plasticity of the brain and all of these areas and what triggers behavior and truly motivates people, I think that's a totally unmined area of culture building. I think, mindfulness has just entered the arena, and, and even holistic health at work and looking after the sort of emotional well-being. I mean, stress and depression and anxiety has just become a very real topic inside large organizations, principally because we're working so hard, we're so connected, we're looking at life through a screen, and now the cost of that is showing up. So I don't know that, the brain and how it works and what motivates us today is understood well enough. So I think there's more room there.
No, absolutely. And I want to spend a minute on this slide, because I think it's a really important subset of that, which is Dr. Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset was sort of the idea of a fixed versus a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is I'm good at math or I'm bad at math. A growth mindset is if I work hard enough, I can be good at anything. And it's a sort of general approach. It's really seeped into K-12 education as a way to teach, which is, in the past it was you're good at something or bad at something, and now it's more what effort's necessary for you to be good at anything you want to be good at. And it's really changed a lot of the educational system, and it's starting to change how companies are thinking about developing people and wanting people to have that growth mindset where they believe they put in the hard work, they can do whatever they want. What we're finding is that's not enough, though, because growth for the sake of growth is not really what we care about, right? There's a company that I love to make fun of in Chicago called General Growth. Like, that's the name of the business. And that's sort of what I see it as. Like, a human being, you're not looking for general growth, right? That's just called fat. Like, that's not what you're looking for. What you want are values. There's a lot of people who have a growth mindset who are horrible human beings. You want generosity. You want people to actually see it as being about more than just themselves. Yeah. And then finally, they need a destination, a purpose. So what we're really advocating for K-12 education and beyond is really developing this idea of a purpose mindset, and that we want to cultivate that in people.
I think it's very true. The tagline for We First is growth through purpose, and we meant growth in every sense: business growth, personal growth, emotional growth, and through purpose, through that lens, as you said. And it was interesting, I was talking to Jay Cohen Gilbert, the founder of B Corp, not long ago, and I said to him a few weeks ago, and I said, with all the challenges we face as a planet and as people around the world, why are you optimistic? And he actually said, because I believe our innate nature is to be purposeful, to be connected to each other, to be connected to the planet. And I think what we're seeing is we're not creating something new, we're just revealing something that's fundamental to who we are, which is you need meaning in what you do. You need that to inform your work. You need to be connected to others on the strength of that. And that's what we truly find motivating, and that's what ultimately will drive growth for the business, but also growth in your impact. So,
but for that to be true, you need an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. So if you operate out of scarcity, your immediate reaction is fight or flight, right, which is not purpose. When you have an abundance mindset, it's how can I serve? How can I help? Because you don't see finite resources, you see potential everywhere. And that's why mindset's so critical. So while I agree with that general reason for optimism, it's pretty different. I mean, you look at it in terms of how it plays out for careers. We found people have a transactional mindset, say things like, my job title defines me. I'm an accountant. I don't have control over my career. It's a sort of victimization. And the only way to grow is to be promoted. These are fight or flight kind of responses. They're coming out of sort of a sense of scarcity. You compare that to how people look at their work, we found, who have a purpose mindset. It's, I have control over my career and well-being.
Right.
My purpose is what gives me direction and identity. I'm not tied to just my profession. I had a great conversation with a police officer who talked about how some police officers define their identity by their badge, and others define it through their purpose and just see the badge as one way in which it manifests. Mm. That's the way we need to operate. And he said the difference between those officers is night and day. Right. And that, people feel like they can grow anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a specific place. So today we see about, 28% of the workforce has this mindset. And if we think about what we need to do to change the world, we need to radically increase that number, right? And I think that's a lot of our work, Simon, is how do we create organizations that are sort of helping to increase this number? How are we advocating for K-12 education to sort of make this change, et cetera?
Right.
And this has a huge impact on fulfillment. So people who have this mindset, 66% chance of being fulfilled. If you don't have a purpose mindset, only a 14% chance. So many organizations go around doing things that are superficial in the organization, but if they're not changing mindset, they're just rearranging chairs on the deck of the Titanic, as the cliche goes, right? What you really have to rearrange is the brain. It's the wiring, it's the mindset. And that's really the hard work of this. It's not about the more superficial things, it's about changing mental wiring. Right. And it's also really critical that we think about this with managers. One of the most startling things, as you'll see on the next slide, had to do with what happens when people perceive that their manager has a purpose mindset or not. So when people say, my manager has a purpose mindset, high likelihood of being fulfilled, solid chance that they report, a third of them being a top performer. But most importantly, this ties very heavily to Simon, our work together, is people who see their boss having a purpose mindset speak well of their company. People who perceive that their manager does not have a purpose mindset, which I think is also a proxy of their leadership of the organization, overwhelmingly are brand detractors. And they're hurting the ability to hire. And this is, in the quote unquote talent wars, this is such a vital statistic.
Right.
So what we found, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that peer learning is really the way to do that kind of wiring change. If we actually want to change the way people are showing up. So peer coaching, Simon, is just two people reflecting about who they are, how they're showing up. It's being able to basically connect experiences and help sort of deposit them in our memory and start to change the way our minds are wired. So people who do peer coaching, 88% of them report knowing what fulfills them. 66% report being top performers. 64% say they have meaningful relationships at work. 84% have a mindset. 34% plan to stay 5+ years. And 64%, this one, Simon, is so critical, feel safe taking risks at work. Because if we have a changing world, if people aren't willing to take risks, your boat is sunk. So engaging in peer coaching, we're finding, is really the thing that activates purpose and activates people having that mindset that we need to be able to sort of embrace change. Does that any of those numbers surprise you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think the only one that really surprises me, because I think instinctively I knew that being purposeful and doing things like peer coaching, which reinforces clarity around that, would increase all of those metrics. Plan to stay longer than 5 years still feels lower than I would have thought, the 34%. But I guess, that's just the life cycle of folks.
Well, compared to the average, which I think is like a year and a half or 2 years.
Right. Got it.
We found they were 3 times more likely to stay 10+ years, a report being that.
Wow. Okay.
So you look at the fulfillment in terms of people doing peer coaching versus not, you see a pretty radical change. It makes sense. If you're regularly talking to your peers and having meaningful conversations, work's going to be more fulfilling. It's not that surprising, on top of the fact that it's actually changing the wiring and that meaning creation in your work. And I want to pause here for a sec, Simon, because one of the things I find most interesting is that no work, no volunteering, nothing itself has meaning, right? So think about what creates meaning is basically being able to connect things to each other. So if you don't process and reflect on something, it actually doesn't have any meaning for you. The thing doesn't have meaning. It's only its relationship to other things. A man doesn't mean anything unless it's in contrast to a woman, unless it's sort of thought about in the context of the idea of gender. That's what gives a sense of a man the idea of meaning. Same thing's true with work. You got to connect it. So we have to fundamentally, to make work meaningful, we have to create space for reflection. In the modern work world, we focus so much on employee engagement, which basically translates to employee busyness, that we haven't created reflections. So even though work might be deeply meaningful in theory, people are helping save babies' lives and saying it's not meaningful because they're not having time to reflect.
Right. Got it. And yeah, it's challenging to get it all done in a day with all the demands on us, for sure, but it's so important.
Well, the more you do it, it doesn't have to take that long. It's just that little muscle of like taking a couple minutes in your commute, taking 2 minutes between meetings, just being able to use that time to reflect.
Right.
So critical. The other thing we found, which was really surprising, was that we asked people, do you learn more from your manager or your peers?
Right.
I think most people would say managers, and our learning systems, our whole structure for organizations is hierarchically driven, and content is driven from the top down. And the assumption is the higher you are up, the more likely you are to be a effective teacher. What we found was that people overwhelmingly report that their peers are where they learn the most. So how do we change the nature of how people learn in organizations? And this applies too to, Simon, your work. When you're thinking about like rolling out purpose, how do you ensure that peers are the ones helping support it? It's not just top down, because top down is not going to be enough.
It's really interesting. What we find in our work is that we never lose sight of the fact that we're all still human beings sitting around a campfire telling stories.
That's right.
That emotional currency of storytelling is so critical. And we find that it's got to be top down in as much as, leadership needs to clarify what the purpose of an organization is and share that. But at the same time, as we touched on at the top of the webinar, you've got to celebrate that inside the organization from the bottom up. You've got to share the story of that flesh and blood human being who's showing up in a certain way and share what it means to them. So I'll give you an example of what that could look like.
Yeah.
You know, a very simple way that you could onboard somebody more effectively is to use your iPhone or whatever you use and do a series of videos with employees that work at a company that allow them to share what it means to them, you know, to work at that company, what the brand means to them, what difference it's made in their life. Just share in a very personal way what it means to them. And then so once you've hired someone and they've, you know, done the paperwork and it's 4 weeks out before they start their first day, in most cases they walk in the office and all they've seen is some paperwork. They don't know anyone and it's a cold start. But what if every week prior to that, you'd sent them a video by an employee, an existing employee, talking about what they care about and what the company means to them. Yeah. You've already communicated, consciously or not, that the employees are seen, that what they care about is important, that this is a culture of purpose. You're so far ahead of the game. So this connective tissue is emotional, and that's the power of purpose.
No, that's absolutely right. And we take it one step further when you look at once someone actually starts, what if you connect them for a series of peer coaching conversations with other new employees or existing employees with sort of structured questions that help them build that psychological safety and that sense that they belong to that organization. And we're seeing with, you know, clients like Kaiser Permanente, like this is such a transformational way to have someone quickly become part of that tribe, right? To be welcomed around the campfire. And we've launched this platform, Simons, that basically helps do that at scale. So you're able to, over video, have people doing peer coaching, and it gives them prompts to coach each other, and then enables them to capture the content as well. So you could capture in a single week 10,000 stories about how people are bringing purpose the organization can use, but also helps everyone like really feel ownership for it. And this we really think is the future of learning and purpose. So I think the question, like, you know, Simon, I think you and I are both asking everyone is like, how are we developing talent for the new economy? How are we building cultures around that? And you can learn a lot more for those that are on the webinar by downloading the report that we just published. It's got a lot more sort of detail to it at 2019wpi.com. That's where you can find that full report with the full data set.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we've had a bunch of questions coming in from folks, and I want to also encourage anyone to click on the Q&A box down in the toolbar there and enter any questions inspired by a lot of what Aaron was sharing. So we've got a bunch of questions here. So let me start with Jack here. Jack here says, cultural issues you mentioned at the top that companies march on could offend half the population and potential buyers of your product. How do you reconcile that with purpose? So how do you reconcile purpose with arguably controversial issues? I'll let you start and then I'll dive in, Aaron.
I think you have to decide what your values are as a company and be really clear about what your values are, and then sort of use those to guide you and to build understanding that you can support sort of a wide range of issues if you come at it from the standpoint of like where your values are, so that it's authentic and it's not dogmatic, it's sort of built and consistent. I think the thing that can create trouble is where people feel like it's inconsistent. If you feel like there are things, I think you can also take a stand. Like if you strongly believe that, you know, racism is bad, like, you know what, I think it's probably okay to put that out there. And if people disagree, like, Godspeed, go work somewhere else. So I think at times it's also about courage. That's true. I mean, you remember Howard Schultz at his annual shareholder meeting, you know, he said to folks, if you don't believe in people's right to marry who they love, then feel free to sell your stock. And that's a bold statement. The other thing is you've got to look at the other side of the fence. Those who shy away from standing up for their values, one would imagine they're thinking that they can play both sides of the fence and appeal to more people, and that will drive growth. But the reality is this: if you're a loyalist for the brand and you see someone not standing up for an issue, you start to question the integrity of the company. And if you are on the outside, on the other side of the issue, and you see them sort of not standing up, you're not sure whether they're really bought into what you believe. And so you end up pleasing nobody. And there was actually a report out not long ago by Edelman, and I think it was No Brands Land was the report. And they said none of the exact figure, but a lot of companies, I think it was 63% of global consumers or belief-driven buyers would not buy a brand because they stayed silent on an issue relevant to them. Yep. So you actually get penalized for staying silent. So very interesting. So
let's have a look at another one here.
Just really quickly, I mean, I think silence is a message, right? And that's sort of part of what that is. When you're not saying anything, you're actually saying something.
No, I think that's really powerful. I love that. Silence is a messenger. So, hey, we've all been in relationships, and when you're silent, you're saying a hell of a lot. As someone who's been married 26 years, I know how to stay quiet. It's said with love. So, Beth, I find that the younger generation of employees has a strong purpose mindset, but are less excited about the jobs driving the skills gap you mentioned, or are quick to criticize their organizations if they don't seem to be 100% pure. How do you recommend navigating this difficult path? So, so they're quick, they have a purpose mindset, but they're quick to criticize. How do you find, on an individual purpose level, how do you find companies navigate that well?
Well, I think you have to look at like why that's happening. It's because they feel a sense of lack of ownership, and also that we've portrayed in business things as binary. The reality is this stuff is super messy, it's super ugly, it's super complicated, it's super interesting. And when we sort of build a culture in which there's sort of this sense of like binary answers to things, we build careers that are built on this idea of binary, we're not actually creating space for like real conversation. So that's part of, again, like where I think the answer to this is around conversation, because those people, if they're able to talk to people at different points of view, be able to understand like how hard a lot of these jobs are and that things are not perfect and feel like they're part of a community, that kind of attitude goes away. It's when we don't understand each other and we don't have empathy and we don't have compassion, and when we think things should be like binary, that we start to run into those problems.
Yeah, none of us are perfect. I mean, what we try and do here at WeFirst, we have an exercise once a week. We get together, and this may sound silly to some, but we have a strength and stretch session where everyone says, well, what do they feel good about in the last week, and what has made them feel good, or what's a challenge? And it could be personal or professional. And also, as someone in a leadership capacity, I also try and volunteer when I'm not showing up the way that I want to, or I've got something going on in my life that I'm working on or whatever, because it's important to give a permission slip for everyone to be human and not to be okay sometimes. And, you've got to, it can't be binary, as you say. There's got to be areas of gray, because I love that expression, which I see every 6 months somewhere, but I think it's so true, is that everyone you see is struggling with something. Everyone is working at something that is really hard for them. And we all put on a good face, and we show up at work a certain way, and we show up socially as a certain way, and we show up digitally in this ridiculously sort of sanitized way. But I think we're all struggling with something, and I think you need to give people permission for that.
No, and I think every like major issue that matters right now is complicated. Climate change is complicated, or climate crisis. Race is complicated. Gender is complicated. Technology is complicated. And we just need to start creating models that are more complex and human to do that. And what I'm hearing you describe with your exercise, which I love, is you're building psychological safety.
Yeah.
Creating an environment where people aren't going to feel judged, they're going to feel heard, and they're going to feel seen. And I think that's one of the things we don't, even though we've got so much social media, so many friends on Facebook or what have you, most people don't actually feel seen. And I think that's a lot of the problems.
This may sound dorky, but we do these things at WeFirst, like, we travel a lot together and we do things and we all get tired and whatever. We've got kind of like code words. So if I say to someone in my team, why don't we talk about this later? It means I'm at the end of my wits and I'm not going to be at my best if I talk about this now. So let's walk away from this topic, and, the same way you need it in any relationships, because people all have their own different stuff going on. And I think if you create this permission for being human, and you do these rituals, for example, on a weekly basis where people are allowed to be human, and then if you have these sort of not code words or whatever, ways to communicate where would avoid unnecessary tension, I think you can get away. I mean, I spent 20 years in corporate life, and sometimes you spend 90% of your time worrying about what someone above you was thinking about.
Yep.
Or that can get like madness. What else is we'll go to the next one. So Aaron, Sam, how do you develop talent for this new economy when, as you said, we don't know what the jobs are? That's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the question of our generation in a lot of ways. So in terms of preparing career, I think first of all, it's mindset, right? So you got to create people who are agile, flexible, don't define themselves based on something that's going to quickly disappear. We saw that with sort of the Midwest and what happened when the industrial economy started to evaporate. They had so many people had so tied their identity to their profession and to an industry that they weren't able to change. And that's a mindset issue, and it's an identity issue. So we need to really work on mindset and identity for folks to say, we want you here as Simon, not as, Simon branding person, right? It's specifically about the human being. And then I think the second piece is helping people be clear about their purpose. So when someone's clear about their purpose, they can have ambition about how to achieve that, and they can find 100 different opportunities to achieve it because it's through the frame of something broad that's meaningful to them. It's not going to change whether they're 18 or 88. It's a constant. And when you can navigate that way and have that clarity, then you can sort of have this wonderful journey. I mean, imagine how great it's going to be over the next 40, 60 years. You can try so many different things.
No, it is going to be amazing. And I want to stress here, the power of the imperative platform is that all of this thinking, which may sound, which is very sophisticated and a lot to get your arms around, all of that is built into the platform. And then the experience of the platform is very, very simple and it's scalable so that you as an organizational leader can go, oh, thank heavens, all of this thinking, this progressive thinking has been done for us and it's been packaged up in a way that allows us to scale so that you can just pull the trigger and know that it's getting done for you rather than feel like, oh my gosh, we've got this huge burden that we've got to kind of get our arms around on top of everything else. Would that be fair?
No, well, thank you. And absolutely. I think what we've tried to build is really that mindset engine and that culture engine that's going to help people be in that right mindset to be able to adapt to this changing world. And then there's going to be, I love the tool Degreed. I don't know if you play with it much, but it's, a platform for learning specific skills, right? So you need that combination of mindset work, culture work, which is the foundation, because otherwise people won't change. Then you need those mechanisms for people to rapidly sort of learn new skills. Degreed is an example of a platform for that. But when you have those two things combined, you sort of are able to have the fertile ground and the seeds that you constantly have to plant.
And one other point I would make is that this investment in this sort of work, you might think, oh, wow, we've got to get if you're a young company, you've got to get your MVP or viable product out there. If you're a big company, you've just got to try to re-engineer and be relevant. I was actually asking Rick Ridgway, who is the VP of Environmental Initiatives at Patagonia not long ago, where do you think the biggest opportunity is for companies to carve out a competitive advantage?
Yeah.
Is it the latest product? Is it being more sustainable? Is it this? Is it that? And he said, it's by looking after your people better. It's internal. And what they've actually done is they've launched a family services program where they provide health and well-being services, not just to the employees of the company, but the families of the employees. Yeah. And so I just love the counterintuitiveness of that, which is the opportunity, your greatest opportunity to get ahead is right in front of you. So you're surrounded by it every day. It's not out there. It's not what your competitor's doing. It's not the latest widget or technology out there, in as much as it's how do you better look after your people. So,
that's actually one of I didn't include it, Simon, in the deck today, but one of the questions we asked in the study was, does your company make employees or customers a higher priority?
Yeah.
And people who said employees had much higher scores on basically all the measures.
That's incredible. That's a really interesting question, right?
And what's interesting to me is if you think about purpose, the way, you and I have traditionally thought about it, over the last 20 years and how it's morphing, like, what if the number one articulation of an organization's purpose is not about the outside, but it's the inside? What if your number one purpose is your employees? How would that change your strategy? How would that change your thinking? Because based on the data we're seeing, that actually will give you more results than focusing on an external one.
I know it's counterintuitive. We say the same thing. We're like, the best way to drive your profit is to really be very clear and activated around your purpose. In the same way, the best way to get the sales out of customers is to do a better job of looking after your employees. And, and then you kind of go, well, that doesn't make sense instinctively, but then you go and see the companies that are doing well and you find out that to be true of them. And you're like, well, why am I struggling with that? Another question here from David, and keep the questions coming on the Q&A button down at the, on your toolbar. So David said, is in a purpose-driven organization, what is the tipping point for team member retention? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 30 days? Like, what's that tipping point for keeping someone?
So if I understand that, it's a question around like, how much time do you have to truly sort of set that culture with them to know whether or not they're going to stick?
Yeah.
How you interpret that? Yeah. I think there's been studies, I don't know what that actual number is, but I've heard sort of anecdotally is that 90-day window. I honestly think a lot of it's even before they start, to your point. I think so much of what someone brings in their head into their first day is actually influencing their experience. Right. So I actually think day -10 or -20 is just as important as day 10 or 20. But 90 days, what I tend to see as being the sort of, if you haven't got them by 90 days in, you don't got them.
Actually, a friend of mine made a big decision in their career to come down to LA and work for a certain company. And on a personal level, he's a big cyclist. He rides a lot competitively and whatever. And the new company, that probably had 20 or 30 employees because they'd opened up an office here. On the day after he was hired, they all surprised him and turned up on his house on bikes in riding gear and all went for a ride together with him.
So cool.
And, like when I saw him after not seeing him for a year or two, he's like, that's the first thing he told me. Blew his mind.
Of course it did.
So let's have a look at another one. So Jen, I find that employees have a genuine purpose mindset but can't help but have a transactional mindset and self-interest as well. Is all self-interest bad? Is there a way to marry the two, just as a company marries profit and purpose? That's a good question.
Yeah, I think you got to start off with the premise that purpose creates profit, not that they're in sort of competition with each other. Because I think the second you start to get into that frame, you sort of are losing the battle. So I see it more as the way to, and we've seen this in our studies, the way to make more money is actually purpose for your career as well, in terms of promotion, moving into leadership, et cetera. It's the people who embrace a purpose mindset that become executives and become CEOs more often than not. So it's really, they're not in conflict with each other. I was talking to someone recently about purpose-driven sales, and she was saying how you need to manage to the transaction, but lead to the purpose. Right. And I think it's the same thing with our own careers. We need to lead with purpose in terms of major decisions, but a lot of day-to-day, we need to manage the transactions, but we got to make sure it's always brought back up to that context of the purpose.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, because there's no mission without a margin. If you're not selling product, you're not going to get anywhere. And as we're in our last few minutes, I'd like to point back to sort of imperative and to say that all of us in this space are deeply passionate about several things. One is addressing these issues that are much larger than ourselves, that are going to define our lives and lives for our children, which is climate change, loss of biodiversity, plastics in the ocean, and all these sorts of things. Yeah. And I say that only because the role of business is incredibly critical in all of that. And that all points back to the challenge to all of us to re-engineer ourselves as businesses, as brands, as communities of people that are not only going to drive growth for the organization, but as a function of that growth, scale our impact, a positive impact, individually as companies, but also collectively across industries, categories, sectors, the whole thing. Yep. And all of that is to say, how do you do that effectively at scale? If you believe those things are important to your organization, will become increasingly so, how do you do that at scale? And I would point everyone to Imperative as a platform to do that, because it builds in all the thinking that Aaron has been talking about, but also allows you to do it effortlessly, both as sort of a head of HR department, but also from the user experience. And the net result of that, well, yes, it'll be metrics in terms of the sense of culture at a company and productivity and so on, but on a personal level, there'll be so much fulfillment, which ultimately I think is the prize that we're all after. We want to feel that our time and the way we show up every day and the work that we do has significance. And I think ultimately that's what we'll look back on and feel best about. And so, you can see Aaron's email there, and you can reach out with more questions or inquiries about the platform and so on. We've got We First Works, which is some courses that explain how we approach branding and storytelling. I'd encourage you to check that out. Or if you have, questions about your brand and how to position your brand and so on, please, you can reach me directly there at simon@wefirstbranding.com. But Aaron, last thoughts, with all the deep sort of wormholes you're in and around purpose inside organizations, privately, when you talk to your peers and so on, what's an insight you'd share with us about where you think things are going? What's a little bit of gold from the Aaron toolkit?
Put me on the spot there, Simon.
Right.
A little bit of gold. No, I think what we're seeing overall is that there's a real shift in the understanding of purpose and the understanding of this work. And I think we need to really follow the science. And I think you said it earlier, Simon, it's the neuroscience of this is really where the gold's going to be. That's where, whether it's from a branding standpoint, a talent standpoint, et cetera, we are getting better and better, and the science is better, the technology is better to actually sort of look at how our brains are processing all this. And the more we can tie that to all of our work, the more we're going to get traction.
Right, right. And, hopefully, ultimately, we'll redefine what we mean by work in as much as, it's how we show up in the world in a way that's in alignment with who we are as individuals. I think when you have that congruency between who you are and what you do, then all that energy we waste worrying about what else we should be doing or what someone else is doing falls away, and we kind of step into ourselves. And then we just show up. And I think when you do that, then you can take more risks. Then you can explore your talents. Then you can sort of drive more success for yourself, because it's sort of, you're being true to who you are. And I know that can sound a little bit waffly to some folks, but it's not. I mean, we all want that moment of alignment where you kind of go, wow, I'm happy and I'm being true to myself, and I see a way ahead that's going to be really meaningful to me. So
yeah, Simon, just to close on that, of people who are fulfilled in life that work full time, what percentage would you guess are unfulfilled at work? So people who are fulfilled in life but not at work, what percentage of people?
Fulfilled in life but not fulfilled at work. Wow, I would suspect it's higher than we think. I don't know, 60%? I don't know.
1%.
Wait a second.
So only 1% of people. So of people who are fulfilled, so they say, Simon says, I am fulfilled, and then ask them, are you fulfilled at work? 99% of people.
1%.
1%. So it's basically statistically impossible if you're working full time to be fulfilled in life if you're not fulfilled at work. That's what we're talking about. That's the stakes. That's the stakes we're dealing with here.
I mean, that makes this work, critical in a whole other different level. And so that's some gold. That's some gold from the Aaron Toolkit.
There you go.
And we will end on that fun fact for us all to noodle on and think about. Again, you see Aaron's email if you want to reach out to him there at the bottom, and you see mine as well. Thank you, everyone, for investing some of your precious time on a Thursday. We look forward to sharing more thinking. And Aaron, most importantly, thank you for the work you and your team does, and just for being a friend and a colleague for all these years. Thank you.
Right back at you.
All righty.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.